Hmm. Hello, Dr. Guthrie.
Hello, Dr. Hill.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
I signed on early to make sure that my light is correct.
Yeah, I always have that concern too.
Hello, Holly.
Oh, hi, Dr. Hill. Hey, Dr. Guthrie.
Hello, Holly.
So nice to meet you virtually.
Thank you. You too.
And I know you and I are both Austin College alumni.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
What year did you graduate?
05, and then I'm also a UTD alumni and now PhD student.
Well, terrific. That's awesome.
So
Connections,
kangaroo and comments.
connections are always wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's always fun. So thank you for doing this. And I know you've been supportive of the School of Arts and Humanities, so thank you for doing that.
You're very welcome.
Thank all of you for organizing this. I'm excited.
Yeah. I only have a fuzzy background. I usually have a cute background.
I think you've got it on blur.
I know. I didn't even know I had meant to do that. So that's interesting. Always entertaining. I do all the backgrounds. I do like all the formats every day. I've done like a Zoom today. I've done a Teams call. It's every day. There you go.
I'm just adding some information to the chat feed.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, there it is.
And then Dr. Guthrie, what's your congregation again?
First Presbyterian Church in Roswell, New Mexico.
Okay. Several of my Austin College friends are Presbyterian ministers, just by default. As you
It's
can
a
guess.
good Presbyterian school, so it's produced many ministers over the years, including my dad and uncle and grandfather. So,
yeah. Yeah, I actually went to seminary and then changed gears. So, previously. TCU? TCU, you know, I think you and I both mutually know John Williams. Yeah, John and I talked through Princeton, which makes sense to go look there, and then TCU. But as like many students, you go where the scholarships are, and TCU offered me a full ride.
right. So Bright Divinity School then, is that right?
Yeah, great. And that seminary education's going into my PhD at UTD.
Nice.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah. So Dr. Hill and I get to talk a lot because some of my seminary and a little bit of current work actually keeps working into her work too. So it's been fun.
Well, awesome.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Wright. And I see Dr. Stewart and
hey y'all.
I haven't seen Whitney Stewart in a long time.
Hi, Karen. Yeah. This is like a reunion for us, Dr. Guthrie. Our campus has been closed for, I've lost track how many months it's been now.
6, 7? Why?
Mid-March, so at least 6.
Yeah, since March. So are all classes being done virtually right now? No?
Most of them. I'm teaching all online.
So a lot of our music courses, but also you'll appreciate this, Dr. Guthrie, because of your relationship with the university. A lot of our research labs, our uppers are in person. So so a lot of your old classes would have been in person.
Right. Yes.
Especially especially things that if it involves chemicals, we don't want them doing it at home. But a lot of our courses in literature and history, those are all at home from remote.
Is church meeting in person, Dr. Guthrie?
Beg your pardon?
Is your church meeting in person?
Yes, we have since beginning of June. Not all Presbyterian churches are, but the ones in our part of the world are. There's a lot of politics involved there, but I won't go into it.
I understand.
And then, Dr. Guthrie, remind us what year you were. What year alumni are you? Are you UTD?
1989.
Okay, 89. Yeah. And did you have a lot of classes in Founders?
Many.
Yeah. Have you? So when's the last time you've been on campus?
Last time, about 3 or 4 years ago, I was on campus.
Oh, what for?
We happened to be in Dallas, my wife and I, and found out that my supervising professor was going to be around that weekend. I think it was a weekend. So made an appointment to meet with him and reminisce for miles.
Yeah. And who was your supervising professor?
Austin Cunningham.
Okay. Okay.
Austin became dean of, what would it be, arts and sciences? What is the dean over the sciences?
Natural science and mathematics.
Natural science and math for maybe 6 or 8 years, and then retired about 2 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, then it was Bruce Novak, and then he just retired, and now we have Dean Sherry as interim only, and then they are about to start that search.
Okay.
Yeah. School's getting, that school's doing really busy. No, so.
I'm going to make an announcement first.
Okay.
Thank you to everybody who's already joined. I wanted to let you know that we're going to be closing out the conversation just before 3 o'clock. And my apologies to those who may have questions that we don't get to. The city of Dallas is making plans to create a racial violence memorial in downtown, and I need to be part of the 3 o'clock meeting in order for them to have a quorum. So my apologies to those who don't get to ask questions, but I thank you very much for coming, and we will leave time to get at least 2 questions at the end.
Are you ready to get underway, Dr. Hill?
Yes, sir, I am ready. All
right. So for those of you who might just now be tuning in, I'm John Guthrie, a 1989 alumnus of University of Texas at Dallas. I'm currently a Presbyterian minister serving a church in Roswell, New Mexico. And I'm really happy to be more or less leading the discussion, if you can call it that, with Dr. Hill this afternoon. So I wanted to briefly introduce her for those of you who may not be familiar with her and her work. So she specializes in African American history and Black internationalism and has taught at UTD since 2014 and had a previous appointment at Del Mar College. She earned her PhD from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 2008, with missions-related coursework from Dr. Grant Becker at Duke Divinity School. And A Higher Mission is her first book, but she has published chapters in other books: Africa Bears Witness, Alabama Women, and Faith and Slavery in the Presbyterian Diaspora. So, Dr. Hill, it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you. Happy to meet you.
And all of you who are joining us. So I'll launch into a few questions, and there will be time for others from those of you who are tuned in. And I know that Dr. Hill wanted to read a brief excerpt from her book also along the way. So we'll start with this one. Dr. Hill, tell us who Alonzo and Althea Brown were and why they were important to you and why you chose to write a book about them.
Absolutely. Althea Brown was a young woman born in Alabama, like my own family. Grew up on a sharecropping plantation, like my own family, but also had a very clear idea of what she would do with her life outside of the fields. She was a woman who dedicated her life to Christianity relatively young, and from the moment that she converted, believed that she was meant to travel as a missionary, and she refused to accept any limitations on that vision. There are many more things that I could say about her accomplishments, such as writing the first dictionary and grammar of Bouchon language, and publishing articles, writing her own short autobiography, and writing a biography of one of her colleagues. The thing that stands out most to me about Althea Brown was that she never lost sight of what she saw for herself, no matter how large the obstacles were. What drew me to write this history was finding out who Alonzo Edmiston was. He came from a plantation in Tennessee. He intended to get medical training with hopes of becoming a missionary. And I came to understand him as the man who saw Althea Brown's vision for herself and was willing to commit all of his energy, all of his skill and abilities to helping ensure that her vision could come true and that they could be happy together, not just happy doing what people expected of them, but doing what they hoped for themselves and what they believed would help provide a better life for their children and grandchildren. And the fact that Alonzo Edmiston was so open about sharing his love for his wife and for his family, that was what gave me my first indication that I needed to write this book.
Very good. You touched on this question in your response to my first one, Dr. Hill, but if you could respond to one that's related. What did your research reveal were the primary motivations for Althea and Alonzo to enter the mission field? What really moved them to take on that as their life's work?
A lot of the motivation came from their academic environment. That Althea, she considered herself growing up through her time in the normal school and then in the bachelor's program at Fisk University. And Fisk was an institution devoted to missions in various ways. There were those who went overseas, as some of the earliest Fisk graduates did, but there were others who were missionaries by risking their lives, teaching in freedmen's schools in the U.S. South, or the famous Jubilee singers who traveled through the U.S. and to Europe at great personal risk and despite illness and obstacles to try to raise enough money to make sure the institution could survive. So Fisk had the motto that their lives are ever on the altar. Althea Brown entered that environment and she saw her future as part of that tradition. Alonzo Edmiston, he understood his future as helping to fulfill the work that he already saw being accomplished by his fellow students or graduates at Stillman Institute. Stillman at the time was the seminary reserved for African American men, and the most famous graduate was William Henry Shepherd, who co-founded the American Presbyterian Congo Mission, the mission that I'll be talking about today. So when Alonzo Edmiston entered that institute, he saw the path of upward mobility leading along the path that Shepherd and several other Stillman alums had already taken.
Very good. I noted your use of the term, their lives are ever on the altar. I've never heard that before, and I like it.
That's the motto of Fisk University.
Is it? Okay.
It's a very impressive place.
So tell us something about the history and work of the American Presbyterian Congo Mission.
The American Presbyterian Congo Mission started in 1891. It was co-founded by William Henry Shepherd and Samuel Lapsley. So the Reverend Shepherd was an African American who went to Hampton Institute and then also went to Stillman for his degree. Since the 1880s, Shepherd had wanted to be a missionary to Africa. He finally accomplished that goal in 1891 after the Presbyterian Church in the United States, or the PCUS, recruited a younger white colleague to join him in the enterprise, and that was Samuel Lapsley of Selma, Alabama. The Congo Mission became known in the first 20 years of its existence for the fact that the mission staff were helping to free people from the internal slave trade, and for the fact that the mission staff helped raise awareness about torture and colonial abuse under the rule of King Leopold II of Belgium. And William Henry Shepherd was instrumental in what became known as the first global human rights campaign, because he took photos and firsthand accounts of the ways that the Congo Free State was sponsoring people to torture others in order to make them harvest rubber, sometimes by amputating their hands and using that as a way to scare the others. So that was the early history of the Congo mission. The Edmistons, they represented the second generation of that reputation of the Congo mission for being a place that protected people from slavery and protected them from injustice. Most of the Edmistons' career was spent in the Belgian Congo in the years after the Congo Free State was hypothetically reformed. But the Edmistons were still witnessing cases of injustice and people feeling colonial abuses. And they had various strategies that they found to respond to that while also keeping their own careers.
Very good. Dr. Hill, who in the Belgian Congo, who were some of their primary colleagues in ministry? Who were some that they worked with while they were working almost 40 years in the Congo?
For this question, I'd like to go ahead and read the excerpt so that I can introduce some of them.
Very good.
So I am going to read an excerpt from Chapter 1 from a section called Industrial Education as Personal and Professional Partnership. If you're following along with the ebook version or you have the physical book, it's on pages 36 to 40. And the excerpt details the backgrounds of Alonzo Edmiston and Althea Brown. The description of Edmiston's seminary years also introduces us to some of his fellow Stillman Institute alumni who became missionaries to Congo. I've already mentioned William Henry Shepherd, but I'll also mention Lucius D. Ampert and Henry Hawkins and Lillian Gant Shepherd. The other early colleagues included Mariah Fearing and Lillian Thomas. The excerpt closes with the goals that African American missionaries had for the only mission station under their management. It was called the Ibanchi Station, and it was near an African kingdom called the Kuba Kingdom. And near the end of the excerpt, you'll hear about the moment when Alonzo and Althea met. So in this section, I'm explaining how the Edmistons' shared goals up to the year 1911 reveal how and why their distinct academic backgrounds were compatible under the umbrella of industrial education. First, Alonzo Edmiston and Althea Brown shared an understanding of foreign mission service as a challenge to poverty. Childhood on the Edmiston plantation in Tennessee brought oppressive conditions similar to those that his grandmother had endured before emancipation. Alonzo was selected to work with her as a house servant for the white Edmiston family from a young age. Having previously lived with his parents and siblings in a small cabin with corn husk mats for furniture. The household workload and the lack of a public school meant that Alonzo Edmiston had attended primary classes for only a few months of the year before the local Presbyterian church nominated him to attend Stillman Institute. This white congregation recommended him to participate in the recent expansion of the seminary, which had just moved to a new campus in 1898. Lacking a scholarship, Edmiston probably worked on the campus farmland as well as the Alabama State Hospital farm to pay school fees. The connections to the Congo mission that he gained through classmates and faculty ensured that Edmiston and his descendants would never return to live in the family cabin. Following the death of his own father, Alonzo honored William Campbell Edmiston as the foster father, who helped him gain a full-time education and exposure to the foreign mission movement. The Brown family also survived through plantation agriculture. Their sharecropping work in Alabama and Mississippi supplemented the early years of their daughter's Fisk Normal School scholarship. While living in Jubilee Hall during the winter of 1892, Althea converted to Christianity and pledged her life to service. In her words, when 18-year-old Althea Brown committed her life to Christ and missions, she started out to win the fight in spite of poverty. That fight motivated her to start a hair care business in the Fisk girls' dorm to help pay her tuition. It strengthened her as she taught summer school to 100 rural Tennessee children in one bare room. Despite the fact that Brown and her parents had no income to spare, she found ways to renovate the schoolroom with books and writing supplies within a week. The teaching position and domestic service for female faculty enabled Brown to pay the expenses for her bachelor's degree and to apply to the Chicago Training School for a year of missions preparation. A background in poverty inspired Althea Brown and Alonzo Edmiston to emphasize construction and house design even before their industrial education began, even before they began their own industrial education school. Part of the focus on construction came from a practical need to make the second Congo mission station viable. The Reverend William Henry Shepherd planned the Ibanchi station layout to provide proximity to the Cuba capital city while appealing to the expectations of potential American donors. Its hilltop location of 20 acres, a large church building with a bell tower, central square, and house-lined thoroughfares made the first rendition of Ibanchi resemble a town. Lucy Gant Shepherd enhanced the project by trying to recreate a comfortable Southern guest house, as she had done previously at the Luego station. The Shepherd home filled the social role of an embassy by welcoming American, European, and African guests to share Gant Shepherd's cuisine. For Althea Brown, being assigned her own small house upon arrival at Ibanchi meant a chance to create her own version of the Fisk Jubilee Hall experience. And the dream of maintaining and expanding Ibanchi helped Alonzo Edmiston earn his full-time ministry appointment. While Edmiston was seeking medical training to strengthen his chances of being accepted to a mission team, he received an opportunity to travel abroad sooner than he expected. Samuel Werner, a former Stillman Institute professor and Congo missionary, contacted Stillman alumni for help with planning a business trip to a village in the Kasai region called Ndambe. Werner had left the mission in the 1890s under controversial circumstances, but he remained interested in the Congo Free State for the economic and political opportunities that King Leopold II's control had enabled. Werner started working as an agent for one of the European companies based there. Edmiston joined his staff in 1904 as Werner made a major, quote, purchase for the upcoming St. Louis World's Fair. His mission was to help Werner acquire several Congolese pygmies and transport them to America. Edmiston's cooking abilities during the excursion made a positive impression on Werner, who credited a delicious meal to his, quote, characteristic skill. Edmiston's willingness to give precedence to his Stillman Institute alumni network over his employment indicated that his interest lay in the destination of the expedition rather than its original goal. Soon after arriving at Werner's destination, Edmiston wrote to his former classmate, the Reverend Lucius D'Ampert, to let him know that he was near the Presbyterian mission station. As he expected, D'Ampert invited him to visit there. Ira Dworkin has suggested that discomfort with Werner's human trafficking plan led Edmiston to leave the expedition and visit the Congo mission instead. His unwillingness to transport people from Congo for business purposes also had a precedent in the earlier work of African American Presbyterian missionaries who rescued enslaved people being transported through the area. But another motivation behind Edmiston's shift in course lay in the delighted feeling he had while visiting his classmate. He was embodying the ethic of racial uplift common to historically Black colleges by reaching out to professionals in his community to find new ways to offer service. He later listed his dates of missionary service starting from the time of Werner's arrival, as if appointment to the Congo mission had been the intended purpose of the visit all along. As a young man, Alonzo Edmiston was known for his tall, thin stature and an introspective expression in his eyes. He tended to display a remarkable openness about his emotions in his letters and journals, and his first published report from the Congo Free State was no exception. The contrast between his positive emotions and the physical demands of his journey are evident in his reaction when DeAmpert's invitation to the mission arrived. Edmiston reported in the Kasai Herald Mission Journal, "So delighted was I at the opportunity of seeing him again that I walked 40 miles in one day, alone, through the jungle. I could not speak the language of the people, and I had to make my wants known through signs. Having passed over many hills and down into many valleys and through many streams, I finally arrived where my friend lived. Luebo was to me what an oasis in a great desert must be to the weary traveler." This report and the only published account of his courtship were preserved when Alonzo contributed to a colleague's 1947 biography of Althea Brown. After a short visit, Lillian Thomas agreed to accompany him on the 40-mile hike to the place that he called an oasis even more beautiful than the first. Edmiston was provided temporary accommodations in the Shepherd home, and it was there that his professional and personal interests began to merge. While the Shepherds were on furlough, Althea Brown remodeled the home and hosted Alonzo for meals at her own Jubilee cottage. Edmiston summarized his first day at the All-African American Presbyterian Mission Station by writing, "I was touched by the happy faces of the mission people and by the earnestness of the two lone workers, Miss Brown and Mr. Phipps. My own heart longed to be at once in the work with them." Alonzo Edmiston quit his St. Louis exposition work without pay, and he joined the Congo Mission Station team early in the summer of 1904. Contributing to Ubanchi became his first assignment. He helped Brown and the Reverend Henry Hawkins fulfill William Henry Shepherd's mandate. Shepherd intended for the Ubanchi team to build an alliance with the Kuba Kingdom, to make the Christian message accessible to its subjects, and establish an eventual mission station within the Kuba capital city. One part of that mandate had been fulfilled by establishing schools, a foster home, and churches in the villages around Ubanchi. Althea and Lucy Gant Shepherd worked on the second part of the mandate by writing lessons and songs in the local languages for their students. Edmiston understood his duty as a new colleague to include completing some of the evangelistic and administrative work that languished while the Shepherds were on furlough. He also helped compensate for the recent sinking of the mission steamship that had caused a shortage of food and supplies. His 5 years of experience at Stillman and additional work at Tuskegee Institute became the resource Edmiston drew from to tackle any requested tasks at the Congo mission with great eagerness. And when a crisis called for it, Alonzo Edmiston also risked his life for the station and its personnel. To be continued.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Dr. Hill, sorry. This may be a good time to take questions from other folks who are tuned in.
Sure.
Any questions? Oh.
Oh, there's one in the chat box. What surprised you most while researching this project? Okay. There were a couple of shocking developments while I was researching this project. I'm going to start with the answer that also deals with the second comment. My archival journey included first deciding not to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I had an invitation from the granddaughter of one of the missionaries who worked with the Edmistons, travel with her and some of her students to the place where the Congo mission was based. I decided not to do that soon after the DRC election was canceled and people started being killed in that area, including American citizens. When I made that choice, I switched my entire research concept towards focusing on the Evanston's colleges and their academic networks and the towns where they were based. That meant spending a lot of time driving between cities in Alabama and going to Nashville to visit Fisk University and spending 2 weeks in Philadelphia at the Presbyterian Historical Society archives. At the time, I thought that decision would be safer. Once I actually started that work in the spring of 2018, I realized I was wrong. Every city that I stopped in had a racially motivated shooting or other incident within hours of the time that I arrived. So in Alabama, I got there just after the first Waffle House shooting of 2018. I arrived in Philadelphia, I think maybe 12 hours after the police were called to drag 2 men out of a Starbucks, and the protest continued about a couple of miles from the Historical Society archives for most of the time that I was there. And then there was a second Waffle House shooting that took place near Nashville just before I arrived, followed by a shooting at the Old Opry just before I left. I was on my way to visit when the librarian at Fisk told me I should make other plans. So getting that firsthand experience of how dangerous travel could be without leaving my country, that was surprising to me, to say the least, and I'm still wrapping my head around that. The other surprise was happier. I wanted to find out some details about the Edmiston's surviving relatives, and thankfully they very kindly interacted with me through Ancestry.com, and I found out that several of them live in Philadelphia now. So during my research, I devoted one day to introducing the family to their grandfather's archives, showing them the scrapbooks that he made that his grandchildren and great-grandchildren had never seen, and helping them understand the parts of their family legacy that hadn't been passed down. And in return, they invited me over to his eldest granddaughter's house for dinner. And they showed me their family tree, and I found out that the Edmiston's oldest son married into the Stone Merriman family of Selma, Alabama, because that's where he grew up while his parents were working. And that's when things got really fun, because I told them that my grandmother is a Stone from Selma. And now we're keeping in touch and wondering whether we might actually be related after all. Ooh. Got some more questions.
There are a number of questions in the chat box. If you'd like to respond to any of those, Dr. Hill.
There's a question about travel. I can answer that one quickly. I was able to finish all of the travel pre-COVID. I'm thankful for that. The largest part of the travel was the about a month and a half that I spent in Alabama, Philadelphia, and Nashville. But I also went to Talladega College for about a week to do the initial research. It was delightful working with the living relatives. It's more delightful working with the Edmiston family, knowing that there are other ways that their family name is now being celebrated. There is a Reformed Theological Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia, that has just dedicated its Center for the Study of the Bible and Ethics in honor of Alonzo and Althea Brown Edmiston. So it's called the Edmiston Center. And I'm putting the link in the chat box. Yeah, so it's an exciting time for the family and also for me. How did the Black missionaries understand their work in relation to the longer history of colonization in Africa? It's the answer for that one kind of has to be taken in at least two stages. So for the first wave of African American missionaries in Congo, and most scholars would say in general, they were thinking of their work as being very similar to the goals of their white colleagues, and those goals, for the reasons of practicality, were going to be shaped by the interest of colonial governments to be able to get permission to establish a mission station and to get a land grant. That permission was coming from colonial leaders. The American Presbyterian Congo Mission, they fit into that tradition from the beginning by getting advice directly from King Leopold II, telling them where they should establish their mission station, because King Leopold wanted to build the railroad into central Congo. So in that first wave, the African American missionaries were focusing on fitting into the practical interest of colonial governments, and also expressing themselves through much of the language that talked about spiritual darkness in Africa and about bringing civilization. That kind of rhetoric and the goals started to change as people brought more evidence of colonial abuses. William Henry Shepherd was one of the Black missionaries who was most famous for collecting that kind of evidence. But there was a tradition even earlier, starting with a non-missionary, George Washington Williams, an African-American journalist who did his best to help break the story of abuses in Congo in the 1880s. When these abuses started gaining international attention, then African American missionaries started to diverge from that general rhetoric of focusing on what the missionaries could bring, and they started to show a bit more sign of thinking about what the African people were communicating about the struggles they faced, about the significance of those struggles, and what would be lost if their societies were broken up by consistent violence and economic oppression. And the fact that some missionaries like the Edmistons were willing to take those messages from their African neighbors and build that into reshaping what mission policy would be, then that's really fascinating to me. Another question from Dr. Guthrie. What was the hardest part of finding the original archives? I had the advantage of meeting people who very kindly guided me towards the original archives. So I'm going to start by saying how they helped me avoid it being as harder than it was. Dr. Sylvia Jacobs of North Carolina Central, she is passed on now, and the book is dedicated to her. But she was at the defining voice in the field of African American missions history, and she told me while I was still a young grad student, just finished my master's thesis, that I should write about the Congo mission and about Mariah Fearing, the one member of the mission who was a former slave. Because of her advice, I went to Talladega College looking for more details about Mariah Fearing, and I met an archivist who told me, while you're here, you should look at this box of microfilm that's a digitized copy of Alonzo Edmiston's journals. And so I did. But once I knew that they were there, the hardest part was getting access to the amount of time that it would take to be able to make my own copy of the microfilm records, because I didn't have the means to stay at Talladega long enough to read them. And so I waited another 6 years before I became tenure track at UTD, and I had the means to go back and get the microfilm.
So the follow-up question is, what was the best part of writing your first book?
Oh. Fulfilling a dream that I've had since I was a child feels great. And having something that I can share with the Edmiston family that I know will help them understand and pass on their own legacy through generations, then that has given me a deep feeling of satisfaction. I got into the history profession partly because I wanted to know more about my own family history and kept running into obstacles that made it difficult to find out more until just a few years ago. So in the meantime, I got used to enjoying historical research for the fun of learning other people's families, finding out about the roots of African American families from the U.S. South, or even from Alabama, like my own. So it made me happy to see the Edmistons reconnecting with what their grandparents wanted to share with them. Then finding out that in the end, this might also be part of my own kinship network. That's just the top. Oh, okay. There's a question about my next big project. In a way, my next project is a sequel, because you'll notice from the timeline that's at the front of this book that Alonzo and Althea Brown Edmiston got fired from the Congo mission in 1908. They returned in 1911, but they still faced occasional challenges and arguments that they had nothing to offer the mission and that they should go back to the U.S. During that first 3-year period after they were fired, the Presbyterian church tried to arrange an alternative job for Alonzo Edmiston as a secretary for an African American YMCA in Mississippi. He chose not to take that job because he and Althea were laser focused on spending the rest of their lives in Congo. But when I read the letter about that job offer, it made me wonder how many potential African American missionaries did devote their lives to the African American Y. And also, I enjoyed living in a city where we have a Rosenwald built Black YMCA building in downtown Dallas. So my next project is studying the Black YMCA and the Black YWCA and their connections to the international mission movement. New question: has writing this book changed the way that I teach in any way? It's made me tell the students a lot of stories, starting with the preface that somebody needs to keep time because I will definitely go on too long once I get started talking about the missionaries. It's made me more open in the sense that with each milestone of the book, I wanted to share it with my students. So I would bring in candy or some kind of treats, and we devote 10, 15 minutes to just giving them the chance to ask me questions. And also I would share a bit of my research with them, maybe show them a picture of the microfilmed version of Alonzo Edmiston's journal so that they could sit back and say, Dr. Hill, take it down. I can't read that. It's too blurry. It's hurting my eyes. And I could show them some of the real struggle in the historical profession.
So Dr. Hill, you mentioned that 3-year period when they were essentially fired from their work in the Congo. A question that I have on my list is what were some of the major hurdles and disappointments that they encountered during their almost 40 years serving in the Congo?
They faced major hurdles for being able to remain and do the type of work that they felt most qualified to do. The book's argument centers on the role of industrial education in shaping this mission movement, but neither one of them thought of themselves as an expert in industrial education. They were funneled towards that type of work based on dominant arguments at the time that African Americans and people of African descent in general were meant to do manual labor. And the Edmistons were allowed to return on the assumption that working with their hands as assistants to some of their white colleagues would be a main emphasis in the rest of their time. They used their own creativity and they used ideas from their African neighbors to find ways to break out of that box. So Althea Brown wanted to focus on linguistics and writing her dictionary. she made sure that that happened and that she could use her other liberal arts classical expertise, even if it was being done under the umbrella of an agricultural school. And Alonzo Edmiston, he found ways to continue focusing on preaching and ministry, even if it was going to be done partly through teaching farming and by developing new types of crops, and by teaching children how to build tables and chairs. Another obstacle came from the context in the United States, which I didn't expect to be as central to their work as it was. So their children were growing up in Selma, Alabama, for during most of the time that they were overseas, and through keeping in touch with their sons, they heard about the public health crisis in the segregated schools in Selma. They knew that downtown Selma was highly segregated. And when Alonzo Edmiston retired and returned to Selma, he had to deal with the fact that there was still widespread discrimination, that the decades-long efforts to win the right to vote were just bringing further crackdowns and recriminations on people who we now think of as well-known activists, but to him were fellow Christians and hosts and friends. And adjusting to Jim Crow life after life on the mission field was a struggle for him. He died in Selma before the major victories of the civil rights movement.
So, Dr. Hill, the paired question is, what do you think that they would have seen as their most satisfying accomplishments in the mission field? What would they have taken pride in as a result of their work?
Althea Brown took a lot of pride in the completion of her dictionary. And she'd be very happy to see the ways that scholars are still using it to study Central African languages and the influence of Central African languages on American English. Alonzo Edmiston, he was proud of the two books, the two agricultural textbooks that he published himself. Together they started an agricultural college, and they felt very accomplished with this detailed plan that they had to use some aspects of Fisk University, some aspects of Tuskegee blended together to create their plans for higher education in Central Africa. They'd be happy to know that some of those plans were used in the early years of the DRC. And then on the personal level, they'd be happy to see that their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have gone on to have professional titles and careers and happy lives and good relationships. One of their granddaughters also became an African missionary.
Well, we're near the time that you wanted for us to finish up, Dr. Hill. Is any closing comments or remarks for everyone?
I thank you for the conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. I'll be happy to talk more about the book with any of you another time. And I thank you very much for joining me and for celebrating a higher mission.
And thank you, Dr. Hill.
Bye to my relatives. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Dr. Guthrie. This was excellent.
I'm very pleased to help, Dr.
I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you, Christy.
What a great job, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.
Great job, Kim. It was really, I learned a lot. So it was really, really fascinating.
It was quite good.
Thanks, Karen. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was really good. So
Glad you
excited.
could-
Yay.
And that's my uncle Wes. Hi, Uncle Wes.
I'll talk to you
Glad you
later.
came. Bye. I'm gonna get you that autographed copy one day, Uncle Wes.
That's all right.
I'm gonna fly up there and get you an autographed copy. It's gonna happen.
Okay. Look forward.
Wish I could stay on longer with y'all. I gotta go. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Later. Thank you, Dr. Guthrie.
And you, Dr. Hill, thank you.
Thank you, Christy Barrett.
You're welcome.